So you want to get into metal? Well, let Papa Questy guide you on your merry way. Because today, I'm going to tell you how to get into every single metal subgenre there is. And we're starting with the Mount Rushmore. We're starting with the big four to get you into all the genres. Now they are Linkin Park. You may laugh at that one, but it's very important. Metallica, Iron Maiden, and Black Sabbath. Those are the staples you need to get into every single genre because they trickle down into every other subgenre. Subgenre turned into Sean Connery. Let's start with Linkin Park because people will be scratching their heads about that one. Now, I'm talking about every metal subgenre. So, Linkin Park is perfect for getting people into metal in general, let alone all the other subgenres of metal. And Linkin Park is considered alternative metal. Some people could say new metal or even, just classic rock. You hear them on the radio all the time. You can't really escape them. You would have heard songs by them before. You would have. Crawling in My Skin, Numb. Come on. You would have, and the newer stuff with Emily Armstrong on vocals, you would have heard them pop up here and there. So I'm starting with them. They are very good to get you into, first of all, alternative metal, because that's a part of the subgenre they are in. Other bands of that similar subgenre, System of a Down, Deftones, and you could even say, Faith No More as well. Bands of that nature, even Rage Against the Machine, which you probably would have heard of as well, with becoming the #1 Christmas song in the UK, Killing in the Name of. It'd help you get into some bands like that of the alternative genre. And those bands, again, will trickle down to help you get into other genres, because some of them kind of flirt the line with new metal. Now, like System of a Down, Deftones kind of flirt the line with new metal as well as alternative, so they're an easy way to guide you into the new metal sound. It's a bit more, I wouldn't say rap orientated, there's some rap in it, there's some rap elements with some bands in new metal, like Limp Bizkit, for example, and some of the early Slipknot, but it's not the pure focus, it's just the style it is, but it would help you get into new metal. Bands, like I said, Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, Korn, Mudvayne, bands of that nature. Alternative and new metal kind of hold hand in hand in a perfect matrimony, so if you like one, there's a very high chance you would like bands in the other. And from then, it gets a bit tricky, If you're listening to bands like Slipknot, the newer stuff, the older stuff, doesn't really matter. They're a bit more on the heavier side of things compared to what we've been listening to before. Deftones, Linkin Park. Slipknot was a bit of the heavier side of things, so they would definitely help people get into the more, I wouldn't say extreme, but I guess extreme for the alternative and new metal sound, which is what we're going for here. And I think the perfect kind of segue from Slipknot, which is a bit more aggressive, but it still holds that melody in, is melodic death metal. Not straight up death metal, not death doom, none of these other death subgenres, but melodic death. I feel like Slipknot into melodic death is a nice, easier transition into the safer realms of death metal. Bands like In Flames, Dark Tranquillity, At the Gates, bands of that nature, especially on the more classic albums. And In Flames would be very good because some of the later albums are a bit more accessible, like Siren Charms, Battles, any of those kind of albums. Come Clarity, especially, it's a bit of a harsher edge, but it still keeps that kind of melodicism within. It would be nice to ease you in, and then once you're listening to the full discography of In Flames, the full discography of Dark Tranquillity, then you'll probably get into some other genres as well. But I would recommend going from Slipknot to some melodic death metal bands, and just take your pick. I would definitely recommend In Flames. Amon Amarth is another very good one, and Arch Enemy. Amon Amarth is more Viking themed, but it's still rooted in melodic death. And if you're going forward to backwards in the discography, which I would recommend for newcomers, the newer stuff is a lot more accessible, kind of like In Flames. You have stuff like Raise Your Horns, you can sing along to, Raising Your Drinking Horns, Guardians of Asgard, stuff like things you can kind of sing along to. That's what I'm talking about here. And if you go backwards from the discography, it'll get a bit more death metal-y, and it might help you get into death metal that way. Now, another band which will help people get in with the Linkin Park kind of comparison is Bring Me the Horizon. You can listen to Linkin Park and then listen to Bring Me the Horizon. They're on the radio everywhere. more mainstream, more accessible. Got collabs with Youngblood, got collabs with Danny Phil from one of the videos for some reason, but we'll get onto black metal later. So they're very good to get people into metalcore and deathcore. That is correct, because Bring the Horizon was once a deathcore band. So if you're listening to all the pop kind of stuff like Mantra and Sempiternal and stuff like that, and then go backwards from the discography, and if you start enjoying the early Bring Me the Horizon, that's a whole nother subgenre that opens up to you, deathcore. Bands like Shadow of Intent, bands like Whitechapel, Suicide Silence, all these other bands will just open up to you, and you might really love them. Lorna Shore, a big one at the moment, very popular. You like Bring Me the Horizon's earlier stuff, you'll probably like Lorna Shore and a whole plethora of other deathcore bands. But if you like the later Bring Me the Horizon stuff and other bands like Sleep Token, bands of that nature, you might get into metalcore. Now, metalcore is a lot less heavy on the vocals than deathcore side of things. It's a lot more like modern Bring Me the Horizon, and I guess modern Linkin Park could be metalcore. You could argue, but it'll help you get into bands like Converge, Avenged Sevenfold, just Architects, bands of that nature. And again, that's a whole nother subgenre of you to check out. Bad Omens, there's a lot of popular bands in metalcore. Some great female-fronted metalcore bands at the moment as well. Spirit Box, help you get into them. So those are all just stemming from Linkin Park. Linkin Park could just burst away. The floodgates are open for all these other bands and subgenres for you to enjoy. Let's flip it over to Metallica. So let's start with one of the other big fours, Metallica. Bit thrashier, but still accessible. It's on the radio all the time with Enter Sandman. Master of Puppets was on Stranger Things. You can't get away from Metallica, the biggest metal band in the world. And what's that going to help you get into? Well, of course, Metallica is in the thrash metal category, so it'd open the floodgates for all the thrash metal bands. So the next ones I'd suggest is the big four, the other three. Megadeth, Exodus, Megadeth, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax. And if you enjoy those three, which you should, because they're great, it would open even more bands in the thrash metal category, and I would suggest Exodus, which was talked about before, Testament, Death Angel, bands of that nature. And if all these, some are a bit more aggressive than others, especially Slayer, but if all these tickle your fancy, then you can go over into the other European side of thrash metal, the German side with Sodom and Creator and Destruction. There's a bit more aggressive, a bit more of an edge to those bands. But let's flip back to Slayer. Slayer's one of the big four, fairly accessible, but it's a lot heavier than all the other thrash bands I mentioned before. So if you can stomach the thrash sound and you can stomach Slayer, which you should be able to, no, it's down to the personal preference, but if you can stomach Slayer, then you might be able to stomach some death metal, because Slayer and Creator especially, and Pleasure to Kill, bit more of an edge, bit more gruff, bit more intense, faster. It will help you get into death metal, because like Pleasure to Kill into some death metal bands is such an easy transition. If you can enjoy Pleasure to Kill, you could probably, and Rain in Blood, you could probably enjoy a plethora of death metal bands, starting with Death, forefather of them all. Bit more accessible to get into, bit more on the technical kind of side of things later on, but classic Death with Scream, Bloody Gore and Leprosy and Spiritual Healing. So if you can enjoy that, it'd spread the doors open for Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, Deicide, all these other great death metal bands, and if you could sink your teeth into all them, it just keeps on trickling down the mountain. So if you like Death's later catalogue, the more technical stuff, like Crystal Mountain, stuff like Sound of Perseverance, the album, you might like technical death metal. Stuff like Atheist, Gorguts, Nile, I guess, kind of brutal, kind of technical, flirting the line. You might enjoy some more technical kind of death metal bands. But if you like the more classic stuff, the early death, then you like more classic death metal bands. Cannibal Corpse, Deicide, like I said. And if you're thinking, Questy, that all sounds good, but it's still a bit tame for me, you go even heavier and then transition into the grindcore, and the slam kind of bands, which give it even more of an edge and even more heavier. You know, like Napalm Death, Repulsion, and other slam bands, and gore grind bands, and all the different grinds and gores and everything you could possibly ask for. Now, let's talk about one of the German Big Four that I was mentioning before, Sodom. If you enjoyed early Sodom, Persecution Mania, Obsessed by Cruelty, and The Sign of Evil, if you enjoyed the earlier Sodom albums, it can open the door into first wave black metal because it has a thrashy sound. Black metal, in the first wave, has a very thrashy sound. So transitioning from the thrash bands into first wave is very easy. Bands such as Venom, Bathory, Celtic Frost, bands of that nature would be very easily transitioned to from thrash metal, from bands like Sodom and, early Creator, Endless Pain, things like that would help you get into early first wave black metal. And from then, second wave opens up melodic black metal, blackened death metal, symphonic black. Black is my favourite, so obviously I can talk to death about it, but this is a generalised view. But bands of that nature, second wave, Burzum, Mayhem, Emperor, you even throw Enslaved in there, Then you got more melodic stuff, Immortal, Dissection, more symphonic stuff. I mentioned Emperor before, but they could be in the symphonic nature. They could be in the symphonic part as well. So yeah, it opens the door to all manner of black metal, just from Metallica. Opening the doors, black metal, death metal, grindcore, slam, all these heavier style of music. Now let's go on to the third one, Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden's a bit more subdued than everything we've talked about before, but it has a more epic edge to it, a more classic heavy metal sound. So from Iron Maiden, you enjoy them. You might like Saxon. You might like Judas Priest. You might like Manowar. Bands of that nature, kind of fantasy-filled, soaring vocals, great instrumentation, all good for heavy metal. And that can lead you into plethora again. It could lead you into power metal. I love power metal. You have the European side, you have the American side, depending on what you like the most. The American side, like Savatage, things of that nature. Manowar as well. And then on the other side, the European, Blind Guardian, Halloween, Rhapsody of Fire, more fantastical, more, Dungeons and Dragons and singing about stuff like that, which I personally love. Some people don't. And that again could lead you into new classical music and other, proto-power and progressive power and all that nature. Iron Maiden could also get people into progressive music, progressive metal, because a lot of later Iron Maiden albums have very long songs, progressive parts. Even early stuff like Ram the Ancient Mariner, Hallowed Be Thy Name, they're clocking in over 7 minutes long, and especially if you love the stuff like Empire of the Clouds later on, it'll help you get into progressive music very, very easily. Bands such as Dream Theater, Opeth, bands such as Queensryche, Pain of Salvation. There's a lot of progressive metal bands out there. Haken, I keep forgetting the name. Loads of amazing progressive metal bands which kind of borrow the style from Iron Maiden as well. I love all of them, and they're all stemming from the same place. Now, power metal could also lead you into folk music, folk metal. Stuff like Rhapsody of Fire, a lot of folk instrumentation, could lead you into bands like Eluveitie, Corpiclani, Fintroll, Ensiferum, a lot of these kind of folk singing around the campfire, dancing along, kind of like Blind Guardians, Nightfall, and Middle-earth. So that could lead you into some folk metal as well. But next, we're going to go into the final one, Black Sabbath, the granddaddy of them all. Now, Black Sabbath is a lot slower, more subdued, and we call it doom metal. So it would help you get into other doom metal bands. Candlemass, soaring vocals, depressing nature. Saint Vitus, Pentagram, Solitude Aeturnus. Again, help you get into epic doom and all the other subgenres of doom. Stoner doom's a big one. Electric Wizard. Electric Wizard is big. Sleep's a big one too. And also Death Doom. The early stuff's a bit more subdued. Early Anathema, Catatonia, Paradise Lost. And then the more savage Death Doom, like Hooded Menace, Asphyx, that kind of stuff. And then that could lead into Funeral Doom if you liked it even longer and slower. Evoken, Ahab, Esoteric. There's so many genres out there and there's so many different ways to get into them, but it all kind of stems from these 4 bands in my opinion. Now you could change these 4 bands to whatever you want. This is just how I think people could easily get into metal. You could change Iron Maiden to Judas Priest at the top, very easily. You could change Linkin Park to Sleep Token at the top at the moment, you know. You could change it into baby metal or any of those other bands like that. It's all up to you. This is just how I feel like people could easily trickle down into all the various subgenres. Now, there's probably hundreds of subgenres I've missed off. Industrial being one of them. But you could easily get into industrial through nu metal. You know, there's some bands in nu metal that have kind of industrial style, especially stuff like Static X, you know? From Static X, you know, Ministry and things like that. You could easily get into like Rammstein and other bands of that nature. Fear Factory, absolutely classic band. There's probably hundreds of other subgenres I've missed off, but I'm doing this on the fly. I haven't completely researched everything. So that is it. That is my how to get into metal video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it's been insightful. Hopefully you can navigate your way through the seascapes of metal into one of these subgenres. But I want you guys to tell me in the comments below. This is the most important bit. How did you get into metal? Did you get into it through one of these ways? Did you trickle your way into the various subgenres? Or did you just go full face planting in to just brutal death? Did you just dive straight into grindcore, head first into symphonic black metal? How did you guys get into metal? Because it's very interesting to see how people's metal journeys went. So let me know down in the comments below, and we'll see you again on another Quest for Metal.